So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Stephen Smith. I'm an attorney in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island. I live right up the road here in Millis. I grew up here in Norfolk. I've been an attorney in Massachusetts since 2010. Before that, I was a musician. I'm a litigator. Most of what I do is in a courtroom. So I tend not to do trusts and bankruptcies and things like that. But I volunteer on a number of programs with the Mass Bar Association, who's sponsoring this program. And this is also sponsored by, we've got the Massachusetts chapter of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. And we've got a website here on the front page of the booklet if you're looking to get in touch with them. One of the questions that always comes up in these sorts of programs is if I need more information or if I need to find an attorney to directly help me with something, answer a question, help me with a problem, how can I find one? Generally, the best way to do that is to, if you don't have a friend who can recommend one, reach out to a lawyer referral service. And this association has one of those. You contact the association, they can put you in touch with a lawyer who's local to you who can help with your questions. We've got, I've got some notes here, and we've also got a booklet, a fantastic booklet full of information that we can work through. It's been my experience in putting on some of these programs. I've done with the Mass Bar, with Community Legal Aid, South Coastal Counties, a couple others. It's my experience talking to people that oftentimes when I'm giving my spiel, they're sort of half listening, waiting to have their own questions. People come with questions and things that they want to know about. So please, if you have any questions, raise your hand, be brave. If anyone's brave enough to jump out now, I'm happy to start with that. I find that that's usually the most helpful piece of the program for folks. Thank you.
Brave girl.
What do you got?
What's the difference between a trust and a will?
Perfect. Great question. So one of the big topics here in this booklet is, I call it succession planning. I think they call it asset protection, right? Yeah, I think they've buried it here into section 1. So section 1 talks about those things a little bit. So a will is a document that obviously tells people how your property is to be dispersed after you pass away. A trust, the plain language way of explaining it is a trust is a way of getting around a will. Trust can be used for all sorts of things. A trust is basically a way of changing the ownership of the asset. So that rather than, so this is my iPhone. If I die, if I have a will that says my personal property goes to my wife or to my son, then under the will, this iPhone, which was mine when I passed away, is going to go to my wife or to my son or whatever. But if I put this iPhone into a trust, I'm creating a separate legal entity. The trust is a legal entity. And I'm saying, I don't own this phone anymore. The trust owns this phone. And I can name someone else as the beneficiary of the trust. I'm using the phone, or more often the example that we talk about here in the book, more often the example would be someone's house. If you want to place your house, the home that you're living in, vacation home, anything like that, if you want to place your house into a trust, then at the moment when you pass away, you don't own that property. So it's not a question of whether it's passing from you to someone else. It passes according to the terms of the trust. What are the benefits of that? The most simple one that people usually think of is tax. There are tax benefits to that.
Nursing homes.
I'm sorry?
Nursing homes?
Yeah, so nursing homes and protection of assets. So there's a big section in here about long-term care planning, LTCI. And one of the things they talk about is how expensive nursing homes are. There's a statistic here in the book, I think something about $177,000 a year these facilities can cost. And what they want to do is they want you to go down and list all of your financial information, and they want to know everything that you own and all of your assets. If you own a house, that's going to sort of count against you, because you're going to look like you have more assets that can be used. They're going to say, well, rather than get some sort of public assistance for a nursing home, why don't you get a reverse mortgage, or why don't you sell your house? You have assets that you can draw on. If the house is in a trust, it wouldn't show up in the same way. Yes?
I'm sorry, I don't want to do your job.
Please.
Just two things. One is, another advantage of a trust is you can avoid probate, because the assets that you put in the trust will go directly to whoever you name to receive them. Not that probate's that scary a thing, but there's a cost to that, as there is a cost to getting a trust created. And sometimes there's a delay, whereas if you have a trust, you can go directly to beneficiaries. As far as the nursing home, Mass Health, which is long-term care, Medicaid, subsidized Medicare that pays for nursing home for the majority of people once you spend down all your money, which doesn't take long, has a 5-year, 60-month look-back period. So unless you put that house or other things you're trying to protect into an irrevocable trust, and I don't want to spend a lot of time getting into the details because I'm sure you have questions that aren't related to trust, but it has to be in an irrevocable trust, meaning you can't change it, touch it for 5 years. Otherwise, it can be
A regular trust they can?
There's a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust. So in order to, and other kinds of trusts, special needs trusts, there's a lot of different kinds of trusts, but in order to avoid the scenario that Stephen was talking about, it has to be in an irrevocable trust for 5 years to avoid the look-back period. Sorry.
No, that's all good information, and that's helpful, and that bridges to sort of the next topic on wills, which is, as you say, avoiding probate. The book talks a little bit about what does it mean to avoid probate. When you pass away, does a court need to get involved in how your assets are going to be distributed, or can you do it without the involvement of a probate court? Yes, there are time delays. There's also legal expenses. Generally speaking, you don't want to hire a lawyer if you don't have to. I would say, generally speaking, there's two ways to avoid having to go through a probate court, or rather having your being able to have your family avoid having to go through a probate court. The first is by setting up a trust, and that's something that you probably don't want to do on your own. I would hire a lawyer to set up a trust. Trusts are complex. And the second, and the book talks a little bit about this, is about changing the ownership in different ways. We talked about how a trust changes ownership of property. You don't own it, the trust owns it. There are other ways to do that. For instance, if you have a home, you can sell or gift the home to a relative. There are ways to protect yourself, to protect your own interests in the home. For instance, if you have a house, you can give or sell it to a relative, and you can reserve something called a life estate for yourself, which basically means, say I give the home to my daughter. My daughter owns the house now. Legally speaking, in most respects, it's her problem. But I've reserved a life estate, which means I've reserved the right to use the home for as long as I'm alive. The book talks a little bit about some of these different strategies, assigning beneficiaries and some other things, but generally speaking, ownership, joint ownership of bank accounts, things like that. If you can either shift ownership of the asset from yourself to someone else, or if you can have some sort of a joint ownership, so a bank account, a house, a car, anything like that. If I pass away and my car is jointly owned by me and by my wife, then at the moment I pass away, instantly, that becomes my wife's property. There's no probate involved, doesn't have to go through a will, anything like that. Wills you can do on your own. I get a lot of inquiries about people say, can you help me with a will? And usually my answer is, if you have complex assets, then a lawyer can help you with a will. If you have kids, you might want a lawyer to help you with a will. But if your assets are relatively simple, if your children are adults, you can do a will. I refer people to LegalZoom a lot of the time. It's a website. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. It's a pretty simple website. You go on and there's forms that are designed. They walk you through the process of, they can do a will in just about any state. It takes 15 or 20 minutes to fill out the information. I don't know offhand what the cost. The last time I looked, the cost was about $120. They change their costs frequently, but generally speaking, it's a lot cheaper than hiring a lawyer. Yes?
Does a will always go to a probate court?
Well, so there's a process called probating a will. The answer is probably yes. A will is designed to go to a probate court. Depending on what actually exists at the time, what your assets are, what your belongings are at the time when you or whoever it is passes away, maybe it's necessary to probate the will, maybe it isn't. But the purpose of the will, yes, is to be quote-unquote probated. A will is basically a document that not only says where you want your belongings to go, but it tells a court where you want your belongings to go. When someone goes to court and they say, yeah, so Stephen has passed away, he's got these assets, we need to figure out where they go, the will is the first document that the court is going to look to. If there's no will, then there are laws. It's a process called intestacy. There are laws that govern how things will be divided, depending on whether I'm married, whether I have kids, brothers, sisters. There are laws that specify basically a chain of succession of how things will be divided up. But yes, the purpose, of a will is to go through the probate court. Yes?
I live in low-income housing. All I have is what is in the little unit, some furniture, nothing valuable. Do I need to make a will?
It's always a good idea to have a will. I'm very reluctant to ever tell anyone that they don't need a will. In practical terms, I see people pass on all the time, and the estates are handled without wills and without going to probate court. Under the law, you're supposed to, even if all you've got is a package of dental floss. Technically speaking, yes, that package of dental floss, we don't know who owns it. It should go to the probate court. In practical terms, probate courts, I do a fair amount of family law, and I give sort of the same explanation. Here in Massachusetts, we have the probate and family court, and all of it is handled together. And the way that I explain it is they're there to help you if you, as a family, can't resolve these issues on your own. Generally speaking, you don't need to bother them if you're able to work these things out on your own. So if all you have if all I have when I pass away is a bedroom full of just personal belongings, and my kids can sort that out amongst themselves, everyone's getting along and all that, honestly, no. It's probably not necessary for anyone to if I have a will, is it necessary to be taken to the probate court? Probably no one's going to go jump through that hoop, and no one's going to complain that it wasn't done. The legally correct answer is everyone should have a will just in case, because we always have, no matter what, even if you are very careful to set up ownership of all of your whatever major assets you might have, bank accounts, things like that, if you're able to set them up all jointly so that when you pass away, they instantly become owned by someone else and there's no need to probate anything. There's always going to be something that you forgot, some package of dental floss, something that you purchased the day before. Yes?
Can I do something like make out an ownership paper to my daughter saying she owns all my stuff without doing a will? In other words, like maybe she sold me the stuff, not she sold me, I borrowed the stuff from her.
Sure.
So we don't have to go through wills and court and everything, because what I have is very little.
Absolutely. So for instance, you can gift things, you can sell things, or you can say, if it's true, I don't want to tell anybody that's representing anything that's not true, but if it's the case, you can say, look, I don't have to gift this to my daughter, I don't have to sell it to my daughter, this belongs to my daughter, I'm just borrowing it.
Okay.
Absolutely, you can leave evidence of that. Again, I'm thinking like a lawyer, so I always want to add the asterisk to every piece of advice, right? The asterisk there is that you want to be very careful when you're gifting away property, because the question is, we talked a moment ago about nursing facilities and various types of creditors that might come in and try to get a piece of whatever it is that you have. Can they look at a note like that and say, well, this was what we call in law a fraudulent conveyance. You weren't really gifting it to your daughter. Really, you were trying to get around the probate laws with this. And therefore, we, as a creditor, nursing home, bank, credit card company, whatever, should take a piece of this. In practical terms, the assets that you're talking about, I don't see that happening. That would be the asterisk to that bit of advice.
That doesn't happen with the trust, though?
No, that wouldn't. So it's hard to speak in broad terms, but generally, no. So if something is owned by a trust, then it's not actually owned by you. So the company would have to, or the creditor, whoever it is, would have to pursue the trust, which is vastly more complex in a number of different ways. One of the things that I do specialize in is collections law and things like this. So the back end of this I'm very familiar with. And generally speaking, going after a person, an individual, their personal assets is something that creditors will do. Going after trusts, they're a lot more reluctant to do that because courts look at it differently, and there's a trustee who needs to get involved, and the trustee generally needs to hire a lawyer, and whatever assets are in the trust, creditor, say, Chase Bank or whoever over here, sues for a claim. Well, the assets in the trust go down immediately when we hire a lawyer. So now there's that much less to collect. And then a judge is going to look at who is owed what. And you're only maybe, it's sort of like a bankruptcy calculation, where I know there's a section in here about bankruptcy court. I don't know how familiar anyone is with bankruptcy. We don't need to go into it too much. But in the bankruptcy process, one of the things that a court does is, and this is similar to probate, which is why I mention it, a court will look for an overview of what are all the assets under discussion here, and then what's the fairest way to divide them up to make sure that the people who should be getting whatever are getting that. So no, generally speaking, that wouldn't happen with a trust.
Not that I have much money, but.
Me either.
Does a trust require an executor like a will?
Yes, it's not an executor, it's a trustee. But yes, so a trust has a person. Sometimes it's a lawyer, very often it's a relative. Most family trusts in these sorts of succession planning contexts, most of them name a child or a cousin or a brother or something like that as a trustee. There does have to be someone named in charge of the trust to administer the trust. And if there isn't, that's an expense that someone will bring the trust to court, and the court will appoint someone who can draw assets from the trust for that
Can the
purpose.
attorney you have
Yep.
act as that in either?
No, I just went through this with my dad because of the fiduciary, the conflict of fiduciary responsibility. So it needs to be somebody separate.
Yeah.
Your attorney can advise that person, but they can't be the custodian.
Okay.
And an attorney can, but not the attorney who sets
The
up
same,
the trust.
same way.
Yes. Yes. Trusts are sometimes, I don't like drumbeating trusts because my immediate explanation of trusts is go talk to a lawyer. Trusts are complex. Trust law is very complex. I work with a lot of low-income communities, and I try to avoid recommending legal costs and attorney's fees as much as I can. I recommend LegalZoom for wills and a lot of things like that. There are some great websites. We have Mass Legal Help. I think it's .org. I'm sure there's a link in the book. But yeah, Mass Legal Help. It's either .com or .org. I think it's .org. There's great information on there. The Massachusetts trial court law libraries also have a series of web pages that are called Massachusetts Law About ... and then whatever subject. So if you, for instance, if you want to know about probate, if you go onto Google or any search engine and you type in Massachusetts Law About Probate, then you'll get this web page from the trial court law libraries that they've set up with information and links to more information about probate. Same thing if you search for Massachusetts Law About automobile accidents or Massachusetts Law About criminal defense, anything like that. Great resources they've set up.
Well, excuse me, but Sherry, you know somebody who helps,
Oh, you're talking about the Metro West Legal?
Right.
So you're with Metro
Yep.
West. So they won't do wills, though, unless you're extremely low income. And I don't know what that number is, but they'll help people with the basic power of attorney, and then they'll do healthcare proxies. And they're also available for consultation for housing, maybe bankruptcies, I'm not sure, a variety of issues. And PESCO, which is our area agency on aging, has a contract with them. So there is a free legal service, but it's limited as to what they can do.
As a low-income person, do I need to have power of attorney and all these other things to?
They're always good to have, and they're not necessarily costly to do.
How do I know what I need? And
That's an excellent question. Obviously, my immediate answer is we're sending you home with these great books that are prepared, and there's a lot of good information in there about power of attorney, about healthcare proxies, some of these other various tools. The answer that I like to give about how do you know what you need, this is getting back to what I was saying about trusts, is I try to take my lessons for succession planning and asset planning from the rich folks in our society. I like to look at the tools that they're using and say, how can we adapt those same tools on a less expensive basis? Because nobody I know can afford $800 an hour for a lawyer. How can we adapt those at a different level for the same sorts of protections? Does everyone here understand what a power of attorney is, for instance? I see a couple of them. So a power of attorney is basically a document that allows someone else to do the things that you can do. In law, we call it an agency relationship. You're making someone your agent. So if you execute a power of attorney, then this person can, for instance, go into a bank and open a bank account in your name or withdraw from your bank account because they can do the same things that you can do. Now, you can limit the power of attorney. You can drop the document however you want. You can write a power of attorney that only limits someone to be able to do one particular thing. A general power of attorney allows anyone to do anything that you can do. And the term durable, when we say a durable power of attorney, if we go back to the general principle, and your agent, someone who has a power of attorney, can do anything that you can do. Well, if you're incapacitated, if you're, God forbid, in a coma, something like that, then you can't obviously do these things. So generally speaking, your power of attorney would stop there. A durable power of attorney enables the person to continue acting in your stead, basically in your shoes, even after you're incapacitated in whatever way you have been. Even a durable power of attorney stops upon death. This is a point that a lot of people I get a lot of questions about this. People are oftentimes very confused about, well, I'm the person's attorney, so therefore I can do whatever. Power of attorney, whether it's durable or not, ends the moment you or the person who granted it passes away. The difference between regular and durable is whether you can do it while the person is incapacitated but still alive. A healthcare proxy is very similar to a power of attorney. A healthcare proxy, I think the book talks about both advanced directives and healthcare proxies. So a healthcare proxy enables someone to essentially be your agent, same way a power of attorney would, but specifically with respect to healthcare decisions, it allows the person to make decisions about your health, about whatever might need to happen while you're incapacitated.
Wouldn't a durable power of attorney do the same thing?
No, a healthcare proxy is a very specific document. Generally speaking, a durable power of attorney doesn't take the place of a healthcare proxy. No. And just to circle back quickly, an advanced directive is a document you sign. You're not empowering anyone. You're saying, I want such and such to happen. For instance, if I'm incapacitated, if I'm in a coma and there's no likelihood that I'm ever going to come out of it, I don't want to be kept alive. I want to sign a DNR, do not resuscitate, anything like that. Those would be advanced directives. It's a document expressing your wishes that can be used as evidence of what you would want, but you still need someone to make that decision. So to answer your question, does someone on a lower income need these sorts of things? The answer is yes, because the situations that necessitate these things don't discriminate on the basis of income. Anybody can get hit by a truck. Anybody can end up in a coma. Anybody can need someone to go to a bank and handle their affairs, or someone to pay their bills, someone to pay their mortgage, things like that, someone to make these sorts of decisions.
Well, I have my daughter on my bank account.
Mhm.
It's, myself and her.
Okay.
So I think the only thing would be the healthcare issue.
So a healthcare proxy is probably an important thing. I think everyone needs a will, durable power of attorney, and a healthcare proxy. I just think everyone should have those sorts of things. And one of the things that I don't like is that we talk about these things as quote-unquote elder law. When I say everyone, I'm saying if you're 35, you should have these things. These are not elder law issues. I think it's unfortunate that we wait so long to talk about them with folks, but there are cheap ways to get these things done. There are free ways to get these things done. It's absolutely true that Metro West Legal Service is a fantastic organization. It's one of the organizations I've done work with. The unfortunate thing about pro bono, about free and low-cost legal assistance in Massachusetts is we just don't have enough lawyers to do it, which is why we have an elder law presentation being given by someone who doesn't specialize in elder law. We've got a lot of presentations to give, and we need volunteers to do it.
Would LegalZoom be good for those three? The healthcare proxy, durable power of attorney, and a will?
Yes, I would recommend LegalZoom for any or all of those three. Honestly, if you can find a lawyer who's willing to sit down with you, or if you feel comfortable figuring these things out on your own, many people do. If you don't, that's okay. Turn to a site like LegalZoom, turn to some of the pro bono services. We don't have enough pro bono resources to cover some of these things, unfortunately. But if you can find someone.
Can I just jump in for a second?
Yeah, please.
So Metro West Legal Services, they do go to some senior centers and do office hours. We have some space issues here, but I have had some conversations with the attorney who try to get her in here. They'll also go to people's houses sometimes if it's necessary. But I know she comes down to this area because she has a standing appointment in Plainville. So I'll try to find out when she's next in Plainville, see if we can piggyback on their schedule and get her in here. Meanwhile, you could set up a one-on-one appointment.
And it's Metro West what?
Metro West Legal Services, and they, we're one of the towns under the HESCO umbrella that they have a contract with for these basic kinds of documents. The healthcare proxy you can just get online. It's a standard Massachusetts form. And I think that's where you're going with this, Stephen. Doing it on your own versus having, well, number one, LegalZoom is probably a cost to whatever document you download.
Absolutely.
But also to make sure you understand what it is that you're signing.
Yep.
Or, with the healthcare proxy, it's recommended that your proxy understands your advanced directives. And you don't want to put, a co-proxy where there's potential for the kids to, one wants to pull the plug and the other doesn't. You want to try to avoid those sort of situations. So having the one-on-one face-to-face conversation with the attorney kind of helps you, think through and talk through some of those issues.
That's a great point, and I would say that the point about communication, about conversing with your family, is if you take nothing else away from this presentation, that is the most important piece of all of these things. Of succession planning.
Be trouble if the communication breaks down.
Absolutely. Yep. Power of attorney, healthcare proxy, any of these, life insurance, any of these things. Your family has to know what is going to happen. You got to talk about these things with your family. We have such terrible stigma in our society about death, about money. What's going on with my finances? My finances are my business, etc. The more families talk about these things, I said I draw from some of the upper class, so to speak, the rich folks. I pay attention to what they do. There was a law firm a couple of years ago that their files got hacked and a whole bunch of stuff ended up online for explaining how they had laid out things for very rich folks. Well, the information was there, and it was there to be learned from. And you can see how the billionaires are planning their estates. And one of the things one of the great lessons from that is that these people are talking about these sorts of issues. The younger generations know what's going to happen with the assets. Everyone knows what to expect. Yeah, you got to talk with it. You can go on LegalZoom and you can get these documents done, but make sure that you understand them and make sure your family understands them. Make sure whoever you're assigning the durable power of attorney to, for instance, understands what they can do, what they can't do with it, what you want them to do, what you don't want them to do with it. The point of a power of attorney isn't just for the person to do whatever. It's for the person to act in your shoes, to do what it is that you'd want. You're not supposed to just be able to draw on your bank account to pay their bills. They should be drawn to pay your bills.
And not everybody may want to have to make those decisions, the end of life decisions.
Absolutely.
So,
Yep.
if you don't have family nearby, you really have to have a discussion with friends and say, gee.
Absolutely. And it's a good point that you need to pick someone who is going to be comfortable making these sorts of decisions. Sometimes people might feel pressured to say, I know this came up in my family. My dad had this conversation with the kids about who was going to be the executor of an estate versus who was going to be the healthcare proxy. I was in law school at the time, so it made sense for me to do the estate stuff. But my brother took over the healthcare proxy because he works in a medical field. He's a physician's assistant. He felt that he would be comfortable making the sorts of hard decisions that my father wanted to be made in those circumstances. And yeah, you gotta trust that the person is going to be able to do what you want done. That's very important. Yes.
Now I'm looking at it, let's say I get hit by a truck
Yep.
and brought into the hospital. Where should I keep the healthcare proxy?
That's a great
Where
question.
should I keep it? So that the trust attendants would know what to do.
Yep. So the simple answer, and then I'll give an asterisk. The simple answer is you want to keep this, generally speaking, at your home and a copy with whoever is the proxy. So I have these papers in my desk at home, and also the person who is my healthcare proxy has a copy as well. The asterisk is that sometimes it's appropriate, depending on someone's healthcare relationship. I've had clients who are treated regularly at, for instance, Norwood Hospital. And I have advised, put these documents on file at Norwood Hospital.
Yeah, that makes sense.
God forbid anything happens, you know where you're going to be going because you go there 3 times a month. So make sure they have the paperwork on file. And that way, you save the conversation in an emergency about, do you have the paperwork? Can we validate the paperwork? Oh, yeah, talk to your legal department or talk to Dr. So-and-so because we've had this stuff on file since last July.
Should you keep that sort of thing on you then? Is the hospital or the paramedics going to look through your purse to see if you have this?
Generally, they won't, no. They might check for, yeah, go ahead.
File of life, everybody has their file of life,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
you can write right on there, healthcare proxy located.
Yep.
I want to make sure it's DNR shirts, just so it's, no, we don't have to guess. It's a moneymaker. Come on, you want in?
I'll talk to you off camera.
Okay.
So, we've talked a little bit about the communications issue and who and when can draw on these sorts of finances. One of the issues, we're a little bit past 1:30, so I don't want to take up more time than anybody wants to sit here listening to me. But one of the issues that I didn't want to get away without talking about is the various scams that are out there. This is it's under Chapter 10 here. We talk about elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. This is becoming a bigger and bigger problem with every year that passes. There are more telephone scams, email scams, more people looking for you folks to sign away your money. I get these calls about your computer has a virus, or your cousin is on vacation in such and such a country and needs money. Sometimes it's a little bit more persuasive because they put a little more thought into it. So one of the ones is there's a popular one going around now. It's DNA testing for cancer. We'll send you a low-cost DNA test, and you take the kit and whatever. And they're not actually stealing from your pocket at that point. They're using your personal information to steal from either Medicaid or your insurance. This is something.
This is the word access.
That's right.
Yeah.
What if you've already done the DNA, like with that one that charts all your family?
Sure, there's a couple of 23andMe or Ancestry.com.
Ancestry.com.
Yeah, there's a couple of those.
Yeah, I did that.
Yep.
Does that make me vulnerable to this then?
Honestly, every time you put your information out there, it makes you a little bit more vulnerable because every database gets hacked.
Wow.
You hear stories about the government databases are being hacked, schools are being hacked. So obviously the companies are also being hacked. For the most part, they do a good job of disclosing it. And when I say a good job, usually they disclose it within a year after it happened.
That's not a good job.
Yeah,
Gives them plenty of time.
that's what passes for a good job in today's
Oh
climate.
my gosh.
Yeah, it's something that absolutely everyone is at risk for. The point that I try to stress about this stuff is all of this stuff is essentially identity fraud. It basically falls under the category of identity theft. And the lesson about identity theft and these sorts of fraud is that it's not a crime of opportunity. It's always a larger scheme. No one is just wandering a street and happens to peek into a car and sees that a purse is lying on the passenger seat and says, you know what I'll do? I'll break the window and steal the purse, and that way I can impersonate the person, and I'll rack up their credit card bills, and I'll execute an insurance fraud scheme pretending to be this person and collect a whole bunch of money. And it's not a thought that occurs to someone randomly walking down the street. These are always large-scale executed operations. If they're targeting you because you're one on a list of 100,000 different people. Any sort of call that you get looking for money, any sort of solicitation, someone says you need to do this, you need to sign over your personal information. Honestly, nowadays, it's even if you need to click a link. You get an email saying click on this link. Talk about that with someone.
I got a call yesterday.
Yeah?
Your social security number, there is criminal activity with someone using your social security number. Please call the following number.
Yeah.
You know, and it sounded so legitimate and scary.
They do.
Yeah.
And they will look legitimate too, because they will, what the term they use is spoofing. If you have caller ID on your cell phone, it will show up oftentimes as a legitimate number. They can make it show up as a local number. They can make it show up as a friend's number. They can make it show up as a government number. Beg your pardon?
Microsoft Corp, I get those.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, your computer told us that there's a virus, something like that. Or we heard that your social security number is involved in a crime, things like that. Let me tell you, speaking as a lawyer who handles these things, the legitimate agencies who investigate these things, they're not going to contact you by phone. It's never going to happen. You might get a call from the Norfolk police. They might give you a call, say, hey, we're the Norfolk police, so-and-so. If you think that someone is legitimately contacting you by phone, always the best thing to do is, it's the same thing you do if your credit card calls you. If you get a call from your bank to say, hey, are you so-and-so, do you have a Chase card? It's being used in Florida. We want to know if this is you. The best thing to do is always, thank you very much for the call. I'm going to hang up and I'm going to call the number on the back of my card. Because if they're calling you, you don't know who you're talking about. Thank you very much for letting me know that there might be a problem. Click, hang up the phone, pick the phone back up, call the number on the back of your card, and say, I'd like to speak to someone in the fraud department. I was told such and such. Same thing if you think someone, if you get a call from someone saying that we're with the IRS or we're with the FBI, and there's some investigation about your social security number, or that you owe us back taxes, anything like that. So, okay, if you think it's legitimate, most of the time you'll know that it isn't legitimate, you can just hang up. But if you think it's legitimate, you say, thank you very much for alerting me, you hang up, you go find a legitimate number for the FBI or for the IRS, and you give them a call, and you say, hey, I received a call alerting me to such and such. I'm concerned this might be a real problem. That's the way to handle it. Don't trust anybody who calls you. And emails the same way. Emails, it's harder to spoof emails. I've gone through a couple of court cases where I've seen the back end of the telephone. It's my understanding that technologically it is virtually impossible for them to prevent spoofing. For them to fix the fact that, for the phone companies, to fix the ability to spoof, for them to make it so that these companies can't make it look like I'm calling you or if Microsoft is calling you, would require completely changing the infrastructure of the telephone system. They have to basically build a new system, so it'll never happen. Email's a little harder to spoof, so there are usually ways, if you're a little bit savvy, you can examine what are called the full headers. You can examine information on email. But the bottom line is, don't trust the alert that comes in, whether it's phone, email, a letter that comes. If you think there's something legitimate, do your own reaching out to the organization. Find your own good contact information for the organization.
Yeah, don't use the number on the letter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nope. That's the letter that's the number the scammers are giving you. That's who you're going to talk to.
What do you think they would be called when they give the number?
You think they would be? I'm sorry.
They would be called. Years ago, get that phone number, and that would get rid of them. But now with the temporary phones, I guess they just toss them. Is that it?
No, the technology is actually a little more sophisticated than that. They don't even need a temporary phone. They're basically boxes that they use that have software programmed into them that they can make the call look like it's coming from anywhere. Yeah. And let me add as another asterisk to this. You might be tempted to get mad at the people on the phone. You might say, somebody calls you claiming to be from Microsoft, for instance. It says your computer is reporting such and such. The truth is, and I've investigated, one of the things that I do is consumer law, so I've investigated a number of these organizations for a couple of different cases. And you trace these things down, one of the things you find out is the person that you're talking to on the phone they think they really work for a company that works for Microsoft.
Oh my gosh.
These people are paid very low wages. The person who's actually the criminal behind the scam is not the person who's talking to you on the phone,
Wow.
oftentimes.
I thought they were.
Yeah, oftentimes the person that you're talking to, they think they're just working a telemarketing job. You know, this is, generally speaking, this is not their first telemarketing job. They've worked 3 or 4 more. They just put on the headset. They say, all right, here's the script that I read. They think they're working for some legitimate company that's been hired by Microsoft. And they're working usually in a rented office space that's been set up as a temporary call center. And if you trace down the company usually ends up at either a totally fake address. I had a couple that were, one was registered to a Marriott, one was registered to the street address of San Francisco City Hall. And then the other one that they'll do is, if it's at all legitimate, it'll be a mailbox in like a UPS store, something like that.
Something I had an experience with a few times was, I don't answer the phone if I see a number on there, even if it's a local number.
Yep.
If I don't know who it is, I don't answer the phone. I figure if it's legitimate, they'll leave a voicemail. Well, they've started leaving voicemails, but the voicemail is so garbled you can't even understand it. I will not call them back.
Good for you. The spoofing is a real problem for exactly the reason that you said. All of us in the room remember before caller ID. And when caller ID came along, we all thought this was this wonderful tool that now you're getting more information. Now you can trust this. I beg your pardon?
I still like caller ID.
Well, so do I when it works.
I don't answer.
Yep,
And
sure.
talking about, I got a call, and they left it on the answer machine, that they had noticed that my Social Security was being suspended.
Of course. And that's a perfect example of something that you are never going to find out via voicemail.
They said there was some kind of investigating you or something, I don't know.
Yeah. The Social Security Administration will send you 6 letters before that ever happens.
I was worried about it, because
Yeah.
I know where the check goes, I have a direct deposit, so I went to the bank and told them there might be a problem. Yeah, they
Good
called
to
me,
hear.
it's all set. It got straightened out quick.
Good, I'm glad. I'm glad for that.
I am too.
Other questions? We're nearing the top of the hour. I don't want to make people sit here long, but I'm more than happy. This is all great information. I think most of the questions that are being asked are questions that other people in the room are wondering about too. So, please.
Would you just reiterate what are the 3 basic things that we should have that we can get at LegalZoom?
Sure. Well, the 3 documents we talked about are a will, a power of attorney, durable or not, and a healthcare proxy. And I would list all of those 3 under. I think the book talks about asset protection is the term that the book talks about. I talk about succession planning because when I'm talking about these issues or presenting on them, I'm talking about them in the context of family wealth, about building from one generation to the next. And we think about it as succession. We think about it as how to bet. There's an expression most of you have probably heard: shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. It talks about how easy it is to build and then lose wealth very quickly in the span of 3 generations. And it's an expression because, so honestly, if you go back and you look at so many families, 3 generations is exactly how quick it happens. You go up and down. Communication is, I go back to what I said, the most important point is so important. Planning these sorts of things. Those 3 documents are, I would say, probably the most immediate, important pieces of that puzzle. But it's a much bigger puzzle, and the bottom line is to talk with your family about what's in play, what are the issues, what do you want to have happen. You had a question?
I have a question on life insurance.
Please.
I have a whole life insurance, and some people say that's the dumbest thing to invest, get rid of it. I don't know what to do. Should I keep whole life or should I cash it out?
I'm happy to talk with you. What are some of the factors that people have said? Why have people said that whole life, when people are telling you that whole life is a bad decision, is it just that these people have a bias against whole life, or are there specific issues to you?
Well, I listened to I forgot her name now, she's on PBS.
Susie Orman?
Yeah, Susie Orman.
Oh, sure.
And she says that's the dumbest thing to do. And then I hear that the insurance companies don't even pay if they can avoid it. So I don't know. And
It's
should
certainly-
I just now take the money and go on a great trip?
The bottom line is
You
that
take me.
Just gonna say that, don't you?
I think we'll all raise our hand on that.
But I really got it in case I really need it,
Yeah.
or that I leave it for my children. That's number one.
Yeah, it's a financial decision that you have to make. It's honestly not a legal decision. It's a financial decision that will make sense differently for different people, depending on some of the factors that jump out. Are what your children's financial situation is. You know, if you were to pass away today without any insurance, what would they all of a sudden assume all kinds of bills and have to pay for, is there a family house that there's a huge mortgage owed on that they want to keep? And honestly, health and medical. If you think that you're going to pass away in the next 5 years, you're going to make a different financial decision than you are if you think that probably you're going to make it to 80, 100, etc.
Because then I worry too, if I have this whole life and I go in a nursing home, they take that too.
Yeah. So there is long-term care insurance, which is a separate
Yeah.
financial decision with basically some of the same aspects. There's a section in their book about in the book about LTCI. It's tricky because the amount that you're paying, the premiums, can fluctuate over time, and what might make sense for you earlier in life, the premiums can change later in life, but also your financial circumstances may change. Your family might, there's births, there's deaths, people gain assets, people lose assets. The family situation is going to look differently after 20 years of premiums having been paid. I would say one of the important principles, I don't mean to talk anybody out of anything. One of the important principles that I think is good to understand when it comes to insurance policies, and especially insurance policies that people have been paying on for a long time, is the principle of sunk costs, which is to say that once you have spent a whole bunch of money on something, you feel an emotional tie to say, all right, I'm in this. I've spent all this money. I should hang on to the train so that I can get something from it. Well, those costs are sunk. They're gone no matter what. They shouldn't be a part of your decision making in terms of what you're going to do from today forward. You're not getting yesterday's money back no matter what. And that's a tough hurdle emotionally for all of us to get over. It's a financial decision. Unfortunately, I can't give you an answer one way or...
I just feel like I had it so I can leave something for my children.
Yes?
But with a whole life
Well, if I
policy,
go
don't you
in-
get to have that, you can borrow that money and never pay it back?
Well, it'll depend on the term. There's so
I have to pay I have to pay till I die
Yep.
on this policy.
Yeah. It'll
But
depend on the
I'm-
terms of...
I'm afraid that if I go in a nursing home, they're gonna take it and my kids don't see anything, and I have nothing from it either.
Yep.
So I see it the right way, right?
Yes. I
Okay.
wish I could tell you that
Thank
that
you.
wasn't a legitimate concern, but it is. Yep.
Okay.
You're
That-
welcome.
That's very helpful.
Good.
So how do you find out about the terms of that policy? Like for you, if she can't get,
Mm-hmm.
if she can't borrow from it without a penalty,
Mm-hmm.
how do you find out about those terms?
So you can always get a copy of the terms from your insurance company. You're entitled to that at any time. You can also call them up and ask. And if you're going to do that, I advise people to do everything in writing. Some things are just not practical to do in writing. You can submit a question like that in writing and keep the answer that they give you. But if you do it, most people would do something like this over the phone. They call up the insurance company and say, look, what exactly are the terms with respect to this? Can I borrow? If I borrow X amount, am I going to have to pay it back? Is there a time frame? Is there a penalty that on the back end if I don't? Those sorts of questions, yeah, you can ask those over the telephone. Just make a note. Make sure you note somewhere. I called on May 14th. I spoke to Jenna. Jenna's representative number was such and such, and she told me this, that, and the other thing. You got to keep records of all of these sorts of inquiries. You had a question, sir?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, I'm confused about the reverse mortgage. I know it's a general question.
Sure.
Is there ever a situation where one should do that? It seems like that's a scam to me.
I don't think so.
Headed for your house, you know. If you're in a financial position
Yep.
where you need that, it seems highly unlikely you're going to pay your way out of that and they're going to get the house, right?
I see where you're coming from, and for a long time I felt the same way. I do think there are circumstances where it makes sense. I agree that in the majority of circumstances, it doesn't make sense. In the majority of circumstances, a reverse mortgage is, the bank is getting the better part of the bargain. But there are definitely circumstances where, for instance, someone doesn't have any kids, isn't leaving anyone behind.
That's me.
Okay? Well, maybe you don't care what's going to happen to your house. And depending on the term of the reverse mortgage, if it's over a certain number of years, and you figure realistically, well, okay, so here's the reverse mortgage, and here's how long I'm going to be around. So what do I care what happens over here?
Right.
It's the same calculation. A couple of years ago, we had a financial crisis. A lot of people were having their homes foreclosed on, and one of the pieces of advice that you heard a lot was, rather than continuing to throw money down a hole by giving it to the bank, just take the keys, leave them on the counter, and leave the house. Walk away from the house. The house is a money hole. You're in your best interest to leave it behind. The same calculation can be made here. There are certain circumstances where, yeah, it's in your best interests to look at the home as an asset that you can draw from. Maybe it makes more sense to look at it that way and to say, I'm going to sell the house and I'm going to rent an apartment, or I'm going to go into nursing care or anything like that, or assisted living, and I'm going to do that with the money. But if you've lived in the house for X number of years and that's your home and you're more comfortable there, then maybe it makes more sense to use a reverse mortgage to treat the house as an asset that you can draw from. There are definitely circumstances where that does make sense. Well, I'm happy to stick around for a couple of minutes after we shut off the cameras if anybody has any questions they don't want on camera. But I want to thank you very much. Like I said, this is my first time doing this presentation. So I appreciate all that. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.